Well, I thought I'd do a quick video on the recent comments that Nigel Farage made about Russia and Vladimir Putin. Now, according to Alex Wickham, it's got an exclusive of Bloomberg, wrote this piece that Nigel Farage tells Bloomberg that if he led Britain, he, number one, would support shooting down Russian fighter jets entering NATO airspace, 2, use frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine, 3, may even put British troops on the ground as part of the UN peacekeeping force. 4, he also vowed that no more reform politicians had corrupt relationships with Moscow. Now, the last one is about Nathan Gill, who has already been convicted of being bribed to say things positive about Russia, and that's already been dealt with. But there were question marks about some things that reform have done in the past, but nothing's come up as far as we're concerned. So it may come up, we don't know. So leave that point to one side for a second. Go to the other ones. So he says, quote, obviously Putin is a very bad dude. I was really hoping that Trump would bring Putin to heel, that some kind of compromise could be struck. Had just been recently struck with Gaza and Israel. Clearly that's not going to happen. Well, point one on this is that Israel and Palestine is not the same as Russia-Ukraine. They're two different complete situations, different scenarios, different conflict. And this isn't about one trying to destroy the other, of course, because Russia have made it clear that Ukraine should not join, be part of NATO. And in their case, as soon as they took Crimea, which was obviously back some years ago now, that it is untouchable from their perspective. And that if NATO was to allow Ukraine in, and Ukraine decided to attack Russia by going, in this case, going to Crimea, which is by international law theirs, that would actually cause a conflict with NATO directly, because they wouldn't have even the chance to activate Article 5, because Russia by that point may even use nukes if they have to. Not that it would happen, but this is what's been said many times before. So Russia have their own issue of this, and of course their starting position, and it's actually the only position they've put in place, is that Russia will take 4 regions off Ukraine. That's without question. And there'll be also a line between the two sides, which means Ukraine has to go a bit further out from the Donetsk region as well, which of course is why Zelensky opposes it, because it puts Ukraine in a really bad spot. And technically it does. But in the end, in any war conflict, there's not a case of compromise, because you told the Palestinians you have to give up everything. You also tell the Armenians you have to give up land for peace with Azerbaijan. That's not a compromise that works well with Armenia, considering they have to give up land and displace their people. So it's a complete contradiction from Farage and even people like Trump and those who are pro-Ukraine, whatever the hell their position is to begin with, to say we're okay for Ukraine to get the land back in the compromise, but Azerbaijan can take land from Armenia without Armenia getting anything back from that as well. They have to compromise more. In fact, they have to compromise everything from their side. Okay, so now this has got nothing to do with democracy, European values, free speech, and all this other stuff they come up with. It's all to do with resources. There's no question about it. So he goes on. Asked what he would do about incursions into NATO by Russian jets, Farage replied, "Gotta shoot them down." I don't think there's anything wrong with that in that statement, because the incursions have not been that bad from Russia. I mean, they're coming and buzzing the ships in the waters near places like Finland. Also buzzed, I think, ships, American ones, back some years back near Syria, I think it was, in the Mediterranean, I think it was. So this is not unusual, and there's always a tit for tat. So if you're saying shoot them down because they're about to launch an attack on Ukraine, that's a different story altogether, right? It's not the same as if someone comes in and flies into your airspace, you just shoot them down. You've got to cause a big problem with Russia. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, but I don't think Farage has helped himself with that statement. Then he goes on, whether UK should use Russian frozen assets for Ukraine. He says, quote, clearly if they're through illegal means, they should be. Well, they're not through illegal means, because the only reason they've been seized is because Europe has got no more money to give to Ukraine. These are Russian assets. You are stealing them from Russia. So does Farage have to come out and make it clear on this? Do you advocate stealing money, which in this case is assets, from Russia and giving them to another country? You have to come clean on that, because I'm not supporting that. I don't care which country it is. End of. If they're through illegal means. You'd have known that by now, though. These assets have been around for quite some time. So I'm not sure what he's referring to there. I mean, I think Farage's trying to have it both ways, because you'll get to that stage a little later, and I'll explain why there's a positive and negative of these statements. But this one really caught the eye. Asked if he would put British troops on the ground in Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire, Farage said, quote, "I'd be very cautious about doing that." While he said he would not want, quote, badged British Army soldiers there, he could support their presence under the United Nations banner, saying he, quote, might put a UN force, think about a Korean approach to it. Okay, so the earlier statement came up about how he would put British troops on the ground in Ukraine. There's a little bit more to that in the actual statement. So fair play to Alex Wickham for actually putting it as a full quote, right? But also, the problem with this is that Russia made it clear there will be no other presence in Ukraine. Okay, they said this is a position from day one. Russia's not come up and been contradictory on this. They've said, you're not putting any troops in there. End of story. Now, they could always change their mind at the end. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. There's a meeting between Trump and Putin in Budapest coming up, I think, 2 weeks from now, or quite soon. But to say that you are possibly putting an international force there, I don't see how it's going to work. Unless you agree to Russia's terms on that, which is not agreeable from Europe's or Ukraine's perspective. Then he goes on, I suspect what you'll see over the course of the coming months, the Americans beginning to deliver Tomahawk missiles to Kiev. I think Trump feels that Putin has made a fool of him. Farage said, clearly Putin is not a rational man. Now, I completely disagree with that, because up to this point, he's been quite rational. He came in around the year 2000. So Farage should know, like anybody else, Vladimir Putin's been around for quite some time. He has not instigated a war in Iraq like we did. He did not instigate a war in Libya like we did. He did not instigate a war in Afghanistan like we did. And of course, bear in mind, bin Laden was actually in Pakistan, not Afghanistan. Okay, let's make that very clear as well. Our boys died for no reason in these countries, right? With exception to Libya, of course. Libya is a corrupt mess. Iraq is a corrupt mess. We plunder their resources. We did the same thing any other country we go into. Yet here we are trying to make it as if Russia's the only one who does this. Okay, we're the same ones, of course, who handed Iraq to the Iranians, who did the exact same thing to the Iraqis as the British and Americans did. Okay, I can go on about that all day. We're not going to talk about it now, right? So I'm not exactly sure why Farage keeps saying that Putin's not a rational man. You're saying Putin's not a rational man. This is the same Putin that came to Europe and said, guys, let us join NATO and work as your protector for the East, right? In this case, China. What are you doing instead? You push the guy away, you push the Russians away, and then they're making deals with North Korea, making deals with China, one of the most powerful forces on the planet right now. They're doing deals with India, which is also a very powerful country, particularly economically, from the economic perspective, right? You're pushing these countries around. These guys came to you with an open hand and said, can we be a part of this deal? And we did do a deal with these guys. You also allowed, and this is why Europe is also complicit in this, including UK and America, allowed a foreign state to blow up a pipeline, which of course is state-sponsored terrorism. So you're saying that Russia are not rational. Let's look at the history of what we've done as well. There's nothing rational about these decisions we've made in the past. They've not benefited us as the UK taxpayer. They've not benefited the European people or the Americans for that matter, right? So why it always might be immaterial in the end? Because, of course, it goes on and says, however, he did repeat his criticism of NATO, saying the endless eastward expansion of NATO and the European Union contributed to Russia's decision to invade Ukraine. That is not true, Farage. With all respect, Mr. Farage, that is not true. That's just baloney. People keep pushing this line about eastward expansion. It didn't help, but that's not the reason why Russia went to Ukraine. Some years back in the year, I think it was 2008, 2009, I can't be exact, but it's around that time, Lavrov, who's the current foreign minister, he's been around as long as Putin, of course, has been, he said that Georgia and Ukraine are a red line when it comes to NATO, pushing them into Europe and becoming part of this. The way it works is that they bring countries to the European Union. Once they've Europeanized them, so to speak, and de-Russian them, they then become part of the European bloc, economic, and of course now becomes effectively a Ponzi scheme in Europe. They then send NATO in and say, we're going to now protect you because you're now part of us. That's the way it's always worked. Russia said, you're not going to draw countries like Georgia and Ukraine because they're a problem. They're right next to us. And we know what you're going to do. All right? Russia said the question about NATO was Crimea. And I've explained this many times in my previous videos, so you can go and look at my previous videos about this. Okay, I did a video about this purely on the reason why Putin decided to go into Ukraine the way he did. Okay, so that's not exactly true. There's some of that eastward expansion you talk about there. You need to explain clearly what that means. You should throw it as a blunt statement, right? Which I don't like. I mean, I'm saying this as a reform supporter, right? Doesn't mean I'm going to throw my toys out of parameters. I'm not going to vote for reform because of this. No, I don't do that. I don't do that crap, right? I still want reform to win. The reason why I think he's saying this, and maybe it's calculated, which I'm not a fan of either, but let's just go with that for argument's sake. The election in the UK won't happen until probably 2028, 2029. I don't think it's not going to happen next year. And it's very unlikely to happen in 2027 as well. Let's just say 2028 for argument's sake. Yeah, there's a general election in this country and reform win. And he becomes Prime Minister. Nigel Farage is now the Prime Minister of the UK. So we're talking about 3 years from now, potentially. A lot can change. By that point, Trump will be almost on his way out. Russia, we know what's happened to Putin. Putin might even be dead by that point, right? But I keep telling you he's been dying for the last 15, 20 years. But, he may die eventually because, we all die of old age, I suppose. But let's say Putin is still there. By that point, Trump has managed, and the rest of the world managed to figure out a deal that keeps every side happy. So this might be all completely immaterial. All right? That's when it comes to election time. Let's say there's problems being dealt with, and Labour still are in the low numbers in terms of probabilities, and Tories haven't bounced back, nor have the Lib Dems, and Reform set to win. People are going to forget about all this. This is not going to matter at all. Quite frankly, none of it will matter at all. So I think Farage is trying to get these kind of foreign policy things out there because it is a problem, for example, to be kind of passive on this. So the reason why he's come out and gone to, for example, Bloomberg and done this event is to kind of show that he is being serious and he's not acting like as an amateur on this, because UKIP purpose really was to get a referendum, which they achieved that. And of course, they won the Brexit referendum. In this case, if you want to get power, you have to be serious about this. So I understand the tone and language. There's a lot of things that are a little questionable, by which I think the calculation from Farage is, by the time it gets to the next election, this won't matter too much. Okay, obviously, Russia will still be in Ukraine, of course, by that point, but it won't be as bad, right? It will still be maybe a settlement done, a ceasefire potentially. A lot can change in 3 years, so we have no idea what's going to happen. So Farage throwing this stuff out there now means that if you're going to come out and say, well, Farage supports Putin, they'll come back to this and say, well, I don't actually. As you can tell, I've made it very clear I don't, right? So I can understand that mindset. That's the only way to look at it from the other side. But if this is a position, and it remains a position going to election, and Russia's still in there, you'll probably get support from people, but you're going to have to find a way to deal with Russia. And the way you're talking here is no different to the Europeans. And Russia don't like that. You might say tough, that's fair, but don't say tough when we might be dragged into an all-out war. Because I ain't going to fight in it. I'm sure know most people are not going to fight in it, because not a war we should have. This should be avoided at all costs. You're wrong about Iraq, you're wrong about Afghanistan, wrong about Libya, in fact, quite frankly, you're wrong about Syria as well. We've been on the wrong side in many, many wars and conflicts. No matter what these idiots tell you about how we've got rid of Saddam, he's a dictator, we've got rid of Gaddafi, he's a dictator, we tried to get rid of Taliban, of course you put him back in again. You put an Islamist now in power in Syria instead of Assad. You got crooks running the country in Iraq. Right, you made everything worse. Okay? But I don't get this hypocrisy, and it comes down to this. You cannot beat this argument. You cannot tell Armenia to concede land for the sake of peace, but not do the same for Ukraine. You can't have it both ways. I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. So I hope Nigel Farage makes it clear on this. This is his stance currently, and it can change over time. That's fair enough. But I don't agree with most of the things he said here. I'm just thinking that he's basing this pure on the calculation, and that people in his party, particularly the advisor, told him to come out and say these things on the basis that it won't matter when it comes to election in 2028 or 2029.